House will come to order. Conference committee reports on House files.
Conference committee report. This is a Kiffmeyer motion. Conference committee report on House File 2555, an act relating to state government. The report's addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees, for House File 2555, a report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by two of the three conferees on the part of the House and two of the three conferees on the part of the Senate. Kiffmeyer moves that the report of the committee on the Conference Committee on House File 2555 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I recognize the author, the lady from Sherburne, Representative Kiffmeyer, who will explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The Sunset Commission Bill, House File 2555, and I am supporting the adoption and requesting a green vote on concurring and adopting the Conference Committee report. There were a few changes, and that one of them is the four of the councils are sunset in 2014, all the rest to 2018. Combative Sports is transferred to the Department of Labor and Industry. A funding issue was resolved in the Conference Committee. And Mr. Speaker and members, this is you have heard this bill before, the features of the bill, and I'm just asking for a green vote.
Discussion. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I too urge a green vote. It's not what it left the floor. The Senate did some messing with it, and we got compromise that I guess we can live with, but I'm not happy with it. But I say vote for green on the adopt the motion or adopt the bill.
Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on House File number 2555 say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File 2555 is amended by conference.
Third reading is amended by conference. Discussion. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Champion.
Mr. Speaker, will Representative Kiffmeyer yield for a question?
The lady from Sherburne will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin.
Representative Kiffmeyer, would you be so kind as to explain to the body what is going to happen to the councils of color and if there was any change in this conference report as it pertains to the councils of color?
The lady from Sherburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Champion and members. There is no change to the Council of Black Minnesotans. Their status, which was on the House floor when it left, is the same returning. So there's no change for them, Representative Champion.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Kiffmeyer yield for one more question?
The lady from Sherburne will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin.
Thank you so much, Representative Kiffmeyer. But can you explain to the body what's going to happen to the Council on Asian Pacific, to the Indian Affairs Council, or the other councils of color?
The lady from Sherburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Champion. As to the other councils of color, their sunset date, they'll come before the Sunset Commission for review again in 2014. This is a compromise with the Senate. Their proposal was 13. And we were able, since the Council on Black Minnesotans was coming back in 2014, some similar issues are there for some of the others, and it was felt by Senator Bonoff and I that reviewing them all together in 2014 would be a positive aspect for all of them, that we would keep in closer touch with them and provide support and help to them as they are being strengthened through the small the Department of Administration has a special assistance for small agencies, so they'll be required to use that, and we'll be able to help make sure that they are in a strong position going forward into the future. And by reviewing them in 2014, we can help keep a close eye on that and be of future assistance.
Discussion. The clerk will take the roll on the conference committee report. The clerk will close the roll. There being 101 ayes, Huntley votes no. There being 101 ayes and 27 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference, and its title agreed to. Conference committee reports on House files.
Conference committee report. This is the Gottwalt motion. Conference committee report on House File 8, an act relating to human services. The report's addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Michelle L. Fishbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 8, report that we agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all three conferees on the part of the House and all three conferees on the part of the Senate. Gottwalt moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 8 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I recognize the author, the gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt, who will explain the report. Chair Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, we have been talking in this session and in last session about ways that we can move Minnesota forward in health care and health care reform by providing additional tools. Minnesota is a leader in the nation in terms of health care. We talked a little bit when we debated the Health Care Compact just a day or two ago about the fact that Minnesota has the tools at its disposal to accomplish many of the goals professed by some of those who want to take a more federalized approach to health care. Members, this is another great idea, Minnesota-only idea, first of its kind idea in the nation, to provide a new tool primarily to help those who are underemployed achieve access to affordable health care coverage in the private market. In essence, members, these personal health premium accounts use current federal trust law to allow multiple sources to contribute dollars to an account that stays with the person and allows that person to then pay for an individual private health insurance account. Members, this bill as it currently comes to us today is limited to paying the premium on a private major medical insurance policy, nothing else. It's meant to help people afford health insurance coverage, private market-based health insurance coverage. It does provide, through the trust mechanism, the ability for employers to contribute on a tax-preferred basis. This is very important. Right now, if you're a part-time employer, You got a bunch of part-time employees. You don't feel you can pay for a group policy. You don't feel you can pay for their health care. They may not be able to get health insurance through their employer. That part-time employee may have multiple part-time jobs and not be able to afford health insurance coverage. Now we set up a situation where these multiple employers, perhaps a relative, perhaps the state of Minnesota, perhaps others, can contribute to this fund and help them get enough resources to purchase private, portable, individual health insurance coverage for themselves and their families. Members, we think this could be very helpful. Minnesota is the 5th highest state in the nation in the percentage of our workforce that are employed part-time. This is a major issue. We've also seen the percentage of people covered under their employers, private insurance coverage through their employers, has dropped recently, which indicates that this is more and more of a challenge for underemployed workers. So members, this is a great tool. It's a great Minnesota idea. It helps us do what Minnesotans do best, and that's provide high-quality, low-cost health care coverage to Minnesotans. A new mechanism. Members, I'm sure there will be questions about this, and I'd be glad to stand for those, but I would encourage your green vote. I would borrow a little bit from what Mary Murphy read during her prayer this morning, and I want to thank her for that prayer. It was excellent. She mentioned, do not let fear of failure or criticism dampen our eagerness to accomplish. Encourage us to avoid waiting for perfection, but save us from mediocrity. Move us to action in the work we have left to do. Members, in that spirit, I offer this bill and encourage a green vote.
Discussion to the conference report. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I would urge you to reject the adoption of this report. And if for no other reason, I mean, we could spend many hours debating the policy in this bill, but the reality is that the process here that Representative Gottwalt has followed to get this before you is absolutely unacceptable. And if he wants to say, as he's saying, that this is a Minnesota idea, first of its kind, and all that, and this is a very big change in the way, it would be a very big change in the way people get health coverage. And for that reason alone, this bill should have gone to the Health Reform Committee, of which he is the chair, and yet it did not. So he took a bill that he had from last session that was in conference, and then in the middle of the night came in with this delete all, which has not been debated fully, has not been debated on this floor as a bill, and put it into this other bill as a delete all. And so this is something that none of us should accept, whether we think this is good policy or not. This is not the way we should be working. And members, if we're going to do major policy changes like this just because we can, then you should be very afraid if you're in the minority in some future point. This is not how we work in this body. And something that's a big idea, the bigger the idea is, the more it deserves to go through the full process and be fully vetted. And that's for all of our protection and for the protection of all of our constituents, so that every interested party can weigh in and we can fully understand what it is we're voting on. So members, for that reason alone, without even going into any of the particular policy, I would urge you to vote no on the adoption of the conference committee report.
Discussion. The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker and members, I'm going to be fairly brief because I don't want to waste my time and your time. This is a bill that's not going anyplace. I'll give you 4 reasons to reject the adoption. Number 1 was the process that Representative Liebling just talked about. At 8 o'clock last night, the public was notified there was going to be a hearing on this bill at 9 o'clock. So this was the thing that was done in the dark of night without public input. There was only one testifier. I assume he was notified early because he supported the bill. So that's the first reason. The original, by the way, the original bill died in the tax committee. Number two, reasons to vote against this. This is basically a hidden exchange bill. It's a step towards setting up an exchange, however, I doubt if it would match what the Affordable Care Act would require. The third reason is it violates federal law, and there'll be somebody else talking about that. And the fourth reason is I'm passing out a letter from the administration on this bill, and that's why I said it's not going anyplace. Read the letter, and we should not waste a lot of time on this because this bill is going to die.
The lady from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if Representative Gottwalt would yield for a couple of questions.
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The lady from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Gottwalt. I'm looking at page 3 of the Conference Committee report, section G, where it says that individual insurance markets paid through this account under this section are not employer-sponsored plans subject to state or federal group insurance market requirements. And as I read that, I am wondering if you can tell me if that means that HIPAA would not apply to these trust accounts.
The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Murphy, for the question. Now, I believe HIPAA rules are applicable in all cases. I think what this says is that we are not holding employers accountable under ERISA, I believe, or that this is not an employer-sponsored health plan. In other words, what we're trying to do is set up a situation, Representative Murphy, where an employer who is not in a position to set up a group health plan and all of the things that go with that is able to make a defined contribution to help an employee of that employer afford an individual private market health insurance policy. And so we are simply saying that this does not constitute a group health insurance plan. It is something they can do to provide a contribution for an individual's insurance policy on a defined basis.
The lady from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Gottwalt. As I read this legislation, and it says plainly that federal group insurance market requirements do not apply. That would include HIPAA, which is about protecting the privacy of people's health information. And I have serious concerns about that. We didn't get to talk about that, of course, in the Health Committee. We didn't get to vet that because it didn't come there. So for that reason alone, I don't think we should adopt this report. I have one more question if Representative Gottwalt would yield.
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The lady from Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Gottwalt, on the same page down below, section 5, it says that the trust accounts shall segregate funds to maintain restrictions on the funds received from contributors. Can you help me understand what that means, please?
The gentleman from Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question, Representative Murphy. The reason that we used federal trust language here, and again, this is existing federal trust law, members. This does not create anything new or monstrous. It's not a mandate. It's not a requirement. It's a new tool. The point about the trust mechanism is it allows for sequestering funds because, for example, an individual contributing dollars to this, let's say a mother contributing for a daughter or a son, would not be able to do that on a tax-preferred basis. Those dollars would have to be sequestered within the trust, a separate account. An employer might contribute some dollars towards that, much in the way I just described in the answer to the previous question, on a tax-preferred basis. And those funds, because they are tax-preferred, would have to be sequestered separately. Again, the trust mechanism, already in place by the federal government, allows for that to happen, but you have to be able to separate those accounts into funds that are tax-preferred and funds that are not tax-preferred. I would also point out, Mr. Speaker and members, that again, HIPAA laws apply. The exemption from federal private market requirements do not state that this is exempting us from any of the federal HIPAA laws for privacy. So I would strongly disagree with Representative Murphy's interpretation of that section of this bill.
The lady from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and if Representative Gottwalt would continue to yield.
The gentleman will yield. The lady from Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Gottwalt. In that same section on page 3, it refers to the restriction on funds. So segregate funds to maintain restrictions on the funds. And I'm wondering, you talked about the tax preference and tax treatment, and of course this should have gone to the tax committee, but it didn't. But that reads to me as though those that are making the contributions have the ability to say how those contributions may or may not be used. And as I read that then, I'm wondering if that would apply to, say, vaccines.
The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again, Representative Murphy, for the question. The bill, if you look in the language, Representative Murphy and members, if you look in the bill, this account is set up to pay for one thing and one thing only. The administrators of these accounts, the people who use them, the people who contribute to them know right up front this account is for one purpose and one purpose only. The dollars can only be used to pay for a major medical policy. So there is no option for the individual to say it can be used to pay for something else. So as they contribute money into it, it can only be used for those things. And I hope that answers the question, Representative Murphy.
The lady from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Gottwalt. I think I'll stop asking questions and just share my point of view on this, why I have a lot of concern about this section. There have been, over the past year, a lot of debates about how we should limit access to certain benefits based on our point of view or perspective. And we've had, since I've been elected, a number of debates about vaccines, and there are members that have served in this legislature that have strong objection to something like a vaccine policy. And I think we are heading down a very dangerous slope if we are allowing the contributors to a trust account to be able to say what those funds can be used for, and they're segregated and such like that. So, I think that I really wish we could have had a good debate about this in the Health and Human Services Committee, as Representative Liebling made reference to. I think it should have gone to the Tax Committee, obviously. It needs a lot more work, and for that reason, I would not support adoption. Thank you.
The gentleman from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. And thank you, Representative Gottwalt, for bringing this legislation forward. This is the type of innovation and cutting-edge change in the private insurance market that we need to see to address a economy where many people are losing their health insurance. They are unable to obtain health insurance through their employer, either by working part-time or employers have decided not to offer the group health insurance anymore. This would fill a very important need, as Representative Gottwalt stated, in order to allow people to meet that health insurance need. Again, I've stated this before on the floor, government health insurance plans reimburse at a much lower rate under the cost of hospitals and doctors. This allows individuals who can't afford a COBRA premium or don't have any type of access to other health insurance because of cost to now be able to have some help to get that private health insurance. The result will be, if they get the private health insurance versus a government program, the reimbursement for medical costs to the doctor and the hospital will be at a much higher rate, a rate where doctors and hospitals actually can come out on their expenses versus the government programs. What's gone on a long time in the private health insurance is what's called cost shifting, and that's where the losses experienced by doctors and hospitals is from low reimbursement from government programs is cost shifted to the private insurance market. That cost shifting has driven up health insurance premiums over the years anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40%. So your private health insurance premiums are exponentially higher to make up for the shortfall from the government reimbursement programs. And that's why this is so important, to empower people to be able to get the health insurance they need in the private market and have reimbursement to the doctors and the hospitals at a level that actually produces a profit or helps them to cover, doctors and hospitals to cover their expenses. I realize it wasn't a perfect process, but if, Mr. Speaker, if Representative Gottwalt would yield.
He will yield. Representative Gruenhagen.
Representative Gottwalt, it did go through two committees, is my understanding, both Commerce and Healthcare Reform, and at that time there was testimony and the plans were able to testify on it, and a couple of others. Is that correct?
The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Gruenhagen, for your question. Actually, it went through Commerce and was passed to taxes. It did not go through Healthcare Reform. We had a motion on the floor. Representative Liebling moved at one point that it come to Health and Human Services Reform. That was turned down by the body, primarily on the argument that this is really Commerce. This is it's utilizing existing federal trust law. That's what this thing is. And furthermore, Representative Gruenhagen, I would point out that in the Senate, this passed right off the floor. This has gone through their Health and Human Services Finance Committee, went to the floor and was voted off. So it's been through that process. It was debated in Commerce. We discussed it on the floor when the motion was made to move it over to the Health and Human Services Reform Committee. So we have had discussion about it. I admit this is maybe an unusual way of having it come here on the floor. I would acknowledge that, but it's not like we haven't talked about this at all. And just to comment briefly to what Representative Huntley said earlier, Representative Huntley, as I've said before, just because you say it doesn't make it so. This bill is not an exchange by any means. It's a tool by which people can pool resources to pay for any private insurance product that's available in Minnesota. Without an exchange, without Obamacare, without all kinds of extra rules and regulations, without the state government stepping in and requiring us to buy only this and not this, or only have these benefits and not these benefits, and only buy them here and not from there. It has none of that. It uses existing trust law to empower consumers to buy what's already available in the private insurance market. So don't buy the fake. Don't buy the fake that this is about an exchange. It's not. I would point out that one of the people who was particularly sensitive to the exchange issue was there last night at this conference committee hearing and did not raise any objections, seems to understand that the bill is not, in fact, that kind of vehicle. So just appreciate the opportunity to clarify that, and thank you for your question, Representative Gruenhagen.
The gentleman from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Representative Gottwalt. Just a couple additional comments. One, we already have a form of an exchange in Minnesota. It's a private exchange. Just you can Google ehealthinsurance.com, and you're going to have an opportunity to look at anywhere from 35 to 40 individual plans. That exchange did not cost hundreds of millions of dollars. It didn't take a 2,700-page bill and government regulations of almost 100,000 pages predicted in order to be set up. And it gives people all types of choices. And this will enhance the ability of our citizens of the state to obtain their private health insurance and not have to fall onto a government plan and be able to provide for their health needs. So with that, I would just strongly recommend a green vote. I want to thank Representative Gottwalt again for bringing this forward, and this is the type of innovation that we need in order to help our people afford their private health insurance. And by the way, one last note, it didn't take 2,700 pages. This is just a 4-page bill. So just think, the private market can do something with a 4-page bill versus a 2,700-page bill that sucks hundreds of millions of billions of dollars into government bureaucracy. Thank you, members. Vote green.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Gottwalt yield, please?
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gottwalt, I started paying attention when you talked about all the tax benefits, the tax implications of your bill. Can you tell me, how did it go over in the tax committee? Did it pass unanimously? Did it pass on a voice vote, partisan vote? How did it go in the tax committee?
The gentleman from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Atkins, for the question. Actually, the bill was held up in the tax committee largely because of some concerns about fiscal impacts, mostly based on the hypothetical assumption that this might in fact have some legal challenge at some point. We call it death through fiscal note. I think you're probably familiar with that, Representative Atkins. We've had criticism of that on both sides of the aisle. But members, that was the main reason it was tied up in tax committee. So it had been referred to the tax committee, did not come up for a hearing yet. A little bit concerned that we might run out of time here, Representative Atkins, so we used one of the mechanisms at our disposal to bring it to the floor for a full debate. So I appreciate the question.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, that troubles me that it wouldn't make a stop in our fine. We have one of the finest tax committees that there are, Representative Gottwalt, and fine pieces of legislation come through that committee. So when you say it was held up by the tax committee, what you're saying is you just didn't go there. You skipped a committee and you sat here on the House tax or on the House floor and you talked about the tax implications and tax benefits, and you just simply skipped the committee. I saw we had some Vikings players, I think, up in the Speaker's chair there earlier. If this were a football game, Representative Gottwalt, a flag would be thrown because you're playing games with the process. And last night, now I understand, this is where I came in and started listening, apparently you had less than an hour's notice for your conference committee. I don't know exactly what you're up to here, but it ain't good, Representative Gottwalt. This isn't how you're supposed to make laws in Minnesota. You skip committees, then you hold committee hearings with little notice in the dark of night. Mr. Speaker, will Representative Gruenhagen yield, please?
The gentleman from Sibley will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gruenhagen, on a different topic other than the process stinking. Can you tell me, does this satisfy in any way the federal requirement for a health insurance exchange framework being set up?
Gentleman from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
No, my understanding it does not.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Gruenhagen. So what we have here, folks, is a bill that has been brought to the House floor with a process that stunk. It violates federal law. It violates HIPAA. It violates our tax committee requirements because it failed to go there. And finally, it doesn't set up a health exchange or even the framework for a health exchange. The single most important item on the Chamber of Commerce, Minnesota Business Partnership, all the business folks that are out there that are looking for this. And we are going to cede our authority, Representative Gruenhagen, Representative Gottwalt, to the federal government. By your lack of action on this, we're going to have the federal government set up the exchange for us. As we sit here, if you're going to skip the process and mess around, Representative Gottwalt, wouldn't you at least do it on something that mattered like that? Instead, you do it like this. It's the wrong way to go. I'd recommend that we not adopt this report, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The lady from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise in opposition to adopting this conference committee report. You know, there are some real issues about people who work for multiple part-time jobs, some of which might offer health benefits and some of which might not. But this doesn't solve it. Because if I work for 2 or 3 employers and they all decide that they're willing to contribute a little bit towards health insurance, they usually have negotiated their own plan. So they may or may not be willing to give up their premium for something else because their rate was based on a group rate and the participation of the unique demographics of their employee base. And so it may cause problems in terms of even individual companies wanting to participate, because if you pull out some of their workers, particularly part-time workers who oftentimes are your youngest, healthiest employees, and you pull them out of the pool, all of a sudden the rates go up for the other employees in that group. And it doesn't necessarily mean for that part-time employee, even if the employer agreed to it, that it's going to work with their 2 different employers. Because if I work for Joe's Coffee Shop and I also work for Target, Joe's Coffee Shop might contract with Administrator A, and Target might contract with Administrator B, and if I got a 3rd job working for the gas station down the block, that might be an Administrator D. And there's nothing in this that figures out how to solve that problem except just create a false hope and expectation on the part of people who have multiple employers that this is actually going to work within their multiple employers. There's some real problems that need to be addressed here. I don't believe that this is the solution.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Gottwalt will yield.
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Gottwalt, thanks for bringing this forward. Just have one question with regard to a provision that begins in line 3.12. And there it states that the administrator of the Unified Healthcare Premium Account has an affirmative duty to notify both the account holder and contributors to the account of any applicable tax subsidies and tax credits that the account holder or the contributor may qualify for, and these tax in connection with items that are being paid for through the account, so that being the insurance premiums or the care, correct? So my question is simply, does that include federal tax subsidies and tax credits? And also, I guess, if you could give a general description of what that refers to, what kinds of tax credits and tax subsidies you're referring to there, that would be helpful.
The gentleman from Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Wardlow, for the question. The tax benefit, and this is one question why, you could argue that it didn't need to go through the state tax committee, because all we're doing is putting some rules in place that help people take advantage of federal tax code, Representative Atkins. Federal tax code, not state tax code. If you look at the analysis, the fiscal analysis of this by our own nonpartisan staff, there is no cost to the state under taxes whatsoever, because it doesn't rely on state tax preference. It only taps into existing federal trust standards for federal tax preference, and primarily so that we can give some federal tax preference to small employers in particular who would be contributing to this account. Again, individuals contributing would not benefit from this in terms of federal or state taxes, but we believe employers could contribute to this under existing trust law and receive some tax preference on the contribution to the account. I hope that answers the question, Representative Wardlow. If I didn't quite get at it, maybe you can help me out.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gottwalt, thank you for that answer. I think that answers most of my question. Maybe you could just clarify a little bit. What exactly is contemplated by tax subsidies and tax credits that are made available in connection with items paid for through the account? So these are tax credits and subsidies that the contributor or the account holder qualifies for because of the health care premiums that are being paid for by the account. So what exactly does that refer to?
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The gentleman from Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Representative Wardlow, it refers to the fact that this account is only for health insurance. So you're right. I mean, these federal preferences tied to a trust account are primarily accrued to the fact that they are providing money for health coverage, for health insurance coverage. And so it works under existing trust law, and there is tax preference here. We're trying to accrue that for the small employer under existing federal tax code for the purpose of providing health insurance coverage. So it taps into those mechanisms within the trust.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Gottwalt yield to a question?
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Gottwalt, I think some of the comments that were made previously seem to indicate that your bill would somehow totally shut down any work on a federal insurance exchange. And if you could clarify for us whether or not that's true, or if in fact this new, more private market-based mechanism would simply go into place and in effect and be an alternative perhaps to some consumers as compared to being forced to go into an all-or-nothing exchange.
Gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Downey, thank you for that question. It raises an excellent point. You know, we've heard here on the floor today now criticism of this as not complying with Obamacare. We're criticized for bringing forward a Minnesota idea, a tool for Minnesota consumers for the private marketplace that doesn't comply with Obamacare. Every other week a new report comes out of CMS in Washington indicating they're going to offer more flexibility to the states and allow them to do more things to kind of meet the general goals of Obamacare. And we hear that over and over again. Why? Because the states are demanding it. Members, what we're being told by the Democrats on the floor today is that we must capitulate, we must give in, we must do what the federal government has dictated the state must do, even though this whole issue is in serious question, not only at CMS in Washington, the healthcare folks, the Health and Human Services Administration, but also in the Supreme Court of the United States. The whole debate here is, does Minnesota need to capitulate and give up and surrender and do the bidding of Washington, or can we in fact use some of these tools already at our disposal, put together in new ways, clearing the way for people to be more empowered as consumers in a private, open, free marketplace to do what they need to do? Your question is excellent, Representative Downey, because this bill is permissive. It doesn't force anybody, an employer, a relative, a friend, the state government, the federal government, a private consumer. It doesn't force anybody to do anything, but it does create some opportunities for consumers to put together the resources they need to simply choose the private health coverage they want for themselves and their families, and to help small employers who might not otherwise be able to afford to help their employees get coverage, to contribute some dollars to that effort on a tax-preferred basis using existing federal tax code. That's all we're doing here, members. It's not a monumental idea, but it's a good idea. It's an idea that helps Minnesota do what it does best. Representative Downey, I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on it, but I went over this when we talked about the health care compact. Essential benefit sets dictated from the federal government. We already have them here in Minnesota. We already have them, members. Mandated benefits in Minnesota exceed what the federal government proposes. A health insurance exchange. Representative Gruenhagen spoke to that. We already have a Minnesota-built and offered private exchange called Uniquotes. And we have e-insurance on top of it. Places you can go online to register for, apply for, purchase your own private coverage. Any coverage you want in the marketplace, available online today. You can do it. You know, we've heard about a high-risk pool. Oh, Obamacare is going to come in and give us this mechanism for a high-risk pool. Minnesotans already have it. The Minnesota Comprehensive Health Association. And by the way, the premium aggregator function that is proposed under Obamacare would not allow contributions from the sources we're talking about, from relatives, from private individuals. So this actually is a more potent tool for combining resources to purchase private insurance than is envisioned under federalized health care, Obamacare, top-down from Washington health care coverage. So members, this is a good Minnesota idea that really shows once again Minnesota can do it better, and that we don't need Obamacare to do it. Thank you for the question, Representative Downey.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Gottwalt. That was what I had understood about the bill, but many of the comments seem to make it sound like we were either choosing this or Obamacare in a full-blown exchange, and I didn't think that was the case based on what I had understood of this. And members, when you think about what's going to happen with the federal health care law, it either collapsing under its own weight and the impossibility of trying to implement it, perhaps some major segments of it being ruled unconstitutional, the cost shifting that's going to occur to the states, I think we are really smart to start incubating a couple of private sector market-based alternatives. So if and when that does happen, we got some other things working that we can leverage and take advantage of to address the real issues of access and quality and cost in our healthcare system. So thank you, Representative Gottwalt. I think this is a great idea, something that we can incubate and watch in a really small fashion and make sure that if and when that thing from the federal government implodes, we've got some alternatives going. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm wondering if Representative Gottwalt will yield for just one more question.
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The lady from Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gottwalt, this question is a follow-up to the questions you got from Representative Wardlow. And I am just curious if these trust accounts, you know, they're a premium aggregator and they can take money from different places. So I am wondering if they can accept the federal subsidies that are laid out in the Affordable Care Act.
The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Murphy, again, a good question, and I've had that from other people too. The truth is we don't have those funds yet. We don't even have a lot of good answers from CMS yet about how this whole thing called Obamacare is going to roll out. This is a question we don't have a clarification from yet, even from the federal government, as to how these funds are going to flow, what form they're going to take. So, Representative Murphy, I'm not sure how funds might flow from the federal government into this account. I know it can receive under federal trust law from a variety of sources, but whether or not those funds will ever be there, whether or not the laws or rules around those funds would allow them to go into this or not, another one of the big question marks around Obamacare. And so I'm not sure I can give you a clear answer about this at this point, Representative Murphy.
The lady from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Gottwalt would yield for one more question, please.
The gentleman will yield. The lady from Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Gottwalt. Maybe the question in a different way: is there anything in your legislation that would block or bar the inclusion of the tax credits identified in the Affordable Care Act?
The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Murphy, again, we're talking about something that hasn't been implemented yet and that we still have so many questions about. I'm not aware of anything in it that would prevent it. On the other hand, we don't know. I mean, the federal government could come forward and say those funds can't go into something like this, or they're restricted only to the Obamacare exchange with all the federal rules and regulations around it. So again, members, this is another thing. We can work with this idea right now under existing federal trust law. And we can use it to help people afford coverage already authorized and approved under our Department of Commerce, who approves, the Department of Commerce approves the insurance, improves everything within the insurance in Minnesota, approves the rates for the insurance in Minnesota. It's all there already under Minnesota law, and under existing federal trust law, we can pool the resources to afford those products now with absolute assurance. Representative Murphy, it's a very good question and a point I'd like to make too here. If you talk to employers in the state of Minnesota, one of the things that's frustrating them and keeping them from creating more jobs, letting loose their money to do what we need it to do, is their fear about the unknowns. The unknowns around Obamacare, how it's going to hit them, how it's going to force them to do something or not do something. What legal requirements are they going to put under? They're scared to death to try anything new. But because this works with existing law, under existing rules, there is some assurance here. They can take this up and use it right now, regardless of what happens with the Supreme Court on Obamacare, regardless of the constant changes in flexibility that are thrown at the states around this. This works now. It gives them some assurance and would be an excellent tool. But I really appreciate the question. Thank you, Representative Murphy.
The lead from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Gottwalt. So, as I understand it, we, can't control the federal government, of course not. But this piece of legislation does not block the ability for these trust accounts to accept the federal subsidies or tax credits from the Affordable Care Act. Thank you.
The lady from Douglas, Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gottwalt would yield to a question, please.
The gentleman from Stearns will yield. The lady from Douglas.
Let's see. I'm just trying to pull something up here. I'm looking at an email, Representative Gottwalt, from Take Action, Minnesota. And Take Action Minnesota is thinking that this is a corporate exchange, all right, and that the administrators can take the Federal Affordable Care Act tax credits. Line 219, it's saying allows these registered entities to obtain funds from tax advantages from named sections and other relevant sections of the tax code related to health insurance. And goes on to say affordable care tax credits are then combined with other sources of revenue, employer, charitable, to allow people to buy health insurance on the exchange. This bill creates the necessary financial infrastructure a premium aggregator to allow individuals to receive Affordable Care Act tax credits and purchase coverage on the exchange. Could you just give assurance to the body that this will not be in any way, shape, or form used to help usher in the Affordable Care Act?
Gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Franson, for the question. Let me be absolutely clear on the record here on the House floor as we're discussing this bill. This is not an exchange. I would encourage the people who throw out this kind of stuff online and cast these aspersions on things like this to read the 2,700 pages of this law and then point to how a bill like this contains anything even remotely associated with a federal health insurance exchange. Obamacare's rules and regulations that we're still getting answers to and still trying to figure out and are sitting in the Supreme Court don't have any fingers in this whatsoever. This, in other words, can function without a federal exchange, without a state exchange for that matter. And this is not created for any other purpose than to help individuals amass resources from multiple sources to pay for a private insurance, the kind of private insurance that's already available without all of the regulations, without all of the requirements, and without all of the trillions of dollars in additional expenses that Obamacare is going to bring. So for the umpteenth time, this is not an insurance exchange. You heard a question earlier, does it comply with the federal law? It does not. Representative Atkins, it does not. And I'm pleased as punch about that, I really am. This does not comply with the federal government's imposition of control, command and control over Minnesotans' health care. It doesn't. It works with what we've got right now, right here today, to help people afford coverage they otherwise couldn't afford. And so I appreciate the question, Representative Franson, but the answer emphatically is no.
The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker and members, I want to address just one thing, and that's the tax law. Representative Gottwalt, you can say things, but that doesn't mean they're true. And you said, well, there's positive tax implications for this, and then you said, but there's no tax implications for this, and there's no tax implications for Minnesota. I would like to read to you lines 3.8 to 3.12. An administrator shall create and maintain records of receipts, payments, and other transactions sufficient to enable the individual to benefit from tax advantages available to that individual under Internal Revenue Code sections 105, 106, 125, and other relevant sections, and then, most importantly, Representative Gavel, and under Minnesota tax law. This bill was not heard in the Tax Committee.
The gentleman from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, just real quick comment on the fact that of the possibility of the federal exchange. In order to qualify for the subsidy, again, there's additional regulations being written, but currently it would have to have, the health insurance policy would have to have the essential benefits set and be called a qualified plan. This bill allows non-qualified plans to be issued. They wouldn't qualify for the federal exchange subsidy, and therefore it would not relate to the Obamacare exchange, because it would be for non-qualified plans outside of the exchange. Again, it's a wonderful, innovative idea. Thank you, Representative Gottwalt, for bringing this forward. Please vote green.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, members, those of you who aren't so in the weeds on health care and health insurance policy as others of us should pay attention to what's happening here, because we are on adoption of a conference committee report And we are debating it on the House floor here as though it were a bill before us for the first time, which in fact it is. And of course, we all know, but maybe the public doesn't know the big difference between those two things. The big difference is that this cannot be amended. It's an up or down vote, take it or leave it, if we adopt this conference committee report. So for any of you who might have any question or any concern, you know, it's great to ask Representative Gottwalt here, but there's no opportunity to offer an amendment. There's no opportunity, there was no opportunity to have in the Health and Human Service Reform Committee, Representative Gottwalt's own committee, this bill didn't come there for discussion and to have advocates and experts weigh in and give us their opinions and to allow us to ask the kinds of questions that are being asked here. And so I say to you again that you should vote this down, even if only for the process, because what goes around comes around, and I can guarantee you that you will see big policy here. If you have the misfortune to be in the minority anytime in the next, I don't know how many years, you will see this kind of thing done to you, where you will see big policy changes coming to you with no opportunity to really vet them and no opportunity to amend them. So, you know, keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to address here is that apparently, a big impetus for this seems to be this is some kind of alternative to the Affordable Care Act, to Obamacare. And so here we are again, members, debating the Affordable Care Act here on the House floor and having a bill that's just a vehicle to be able to talk about, oh, how bad it is and how, you know, these things that people here don't like about the Affordable Care Act. So I think it's fair also to have just a minute to remind the public of the many important things that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and President Obama has said he doesn't mind having it be called Obamacares, because indeed President Obama and the Congress, the people who voted for the Affordable Care Act, have made some very, very important advances in health coverage for Minnesotans and for all Americans. And you know, without going into lots of this, Representative Gottwalt, I think it was, mentioned that there's a high-risk pool in the Affordable Care Act and that Minnesota already has one, and that's true because a lot of the ideas in the Affordable Care Act came from Minnesota and other states that are doing things that were working well. And in fact, a lot of the ideas, like an insurance exchange itself, were Republican ideas that Republicans supported before they decided that it was Obamacare and they had to be against it. So this legislation, this bill that passed, that's now federal law, is it something that I love and am totally committed to? Well, not actually, because I actually thought that we should do health care, that we should deliver health care in this country a better way. But the reason that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is structured the way it is, and the reason it's so complicated, in large part is because it's an attempt to not cut out private health insurance entirely. Because private health insurance has been a big failure for the American people. Because what you had before the Affordable Care Act was you had companies, and of course corporations, companies, they're there for the bottom line. That is their mission. It's not evil, but that is what they're there for. So they're not there to give people care. They're there for the bottom line. So what you had was companies that were denying people coverage if you had any kind of a pre-existing condition, or if you were covered and you got sick and you were spending too much money, they would find a way to drop you. Or if you're a young person, you couldn't stay on your parents' insurance policy, which you now can up to age 26. It's provided coverage for thousands of Minnesotans that didn't have coverage before. People with pre-existing conditions, when the law is fully implemented, will not be able to be denied coverage because of that pre-existing condition. Women will not be able to be charged higher premiums because they're women. In other words, being female will no longer be a pre-existing condition or something that causes you to be charged higher under your insurance. So there are many, many benefits that this will bring. And is it complicated? Sure, because it's complicated because this law keeps insurance companies in the game. And in order to stay in the game, they need certain things like like having everybody in the pool. So because if they're going to cover people that have pre-existing conditions, the pool needs to include everybody, and that's why you have this mandatory health coverage which everybody loves to hate, including me, including a lot of people. But that's what it will take to keep insurance companies in the game if that's the sort of system we want to have. So this bill before you that we're now debating as a bill as though it were here for the first time, because it is, the bill before you basically goes the complete opposite direction. It says, we're going to go all the way back completely private. We're going to go totally the other way. And this is very big changes that really do need a lot of debate, should not be before us as a conference committee report, should have gone to the tax committee, should certainly have come to the Health and Human Service Reform Committee, Representative Gottwalt's own committee. But instead, we have this process where we end up here on the floor on adoption of a conference committee report with even questions from members on your side of the aisle, his own members having to ask questions that really should have been answered before we have an up or down vote on this conference committee report. So members, again, I urge you to vote no on this conference committee report on the adoption. Send it back, and let's only bring things to the floor that have been through the proper process, at least some semblance of the process, some colorable process, so that with a straight face we can say that this has received the review that Minnesotans deserve.
Discussion. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Gottwalt will yield.
The gentleman will yield. Gentleman from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Gottwalt, if you would just provide some assurance and clarification perhaps with regard to the powers of the Commissioner of Commerce under this bill, would the Commissioner of Commerce have any ability to regulate, by rule, what would be includable in a written agreement between an employer and an administrator, or between an administrator and an individual with regard to what might be paid for out of this account? Or in general, in addition, could you just clarify whether the Commissioner would have any authority to regulate what these funds could be used for?
Gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Wardlow, for the question. The main reason the Commerce Commissioner is involved in this, members, is we don't want it's specifically referenced in the area about the administration of these accounts. So somebody who's actually going to function as an administrator of one of these trust accounts, you don't want it to be the drug dealer on the corner or a fly-by-night person who drives up and says, hey, I'd like to administer your trust account. The Commerce Commissioner needs to be looking over that and saying, this person knows what they're doing legitimately, the forms being used are appropriate. That is the main reason that we're invoking the Commerce Commissioner. There is no intent nor any language in this bill that suggests any powers beyond that for the Commissioner. This is clearly a commerce issue, and that's where I disagree somewhat with Representative Liebling. Yes, it involves health insurance, but it uses, again, federal trust law to deal with commerce, a commerce-based mechanism to help people get insurance coverage. And Representative Liebling, by the way, while I'm at it, you want to castigate private insurance, and you show how little you know about it by some of the things you said. A lot of people in this state get high-quality, low-cost health insurance coverage from those same insurance companies. They're protected from catastrophic loss by that coverage. They get their benefits paid out. They are taken care of. Minnesota has a high percentage, one of the highest percentage of its population in the nation, with good, high-quality private health insurance coverage. The difference here is that we're not taking those private products and hanging it in top-down, command and control, huge federal government regulated marketplace that's not only going to tell us what to do with that, but has the high likelihood of creating the rules in that marketplace such that it would disadvantage private insurance coverage, make it so dependent on federal subsidies, which we won't have for long, by the way, Representative Liebling. If you look at what this is doing to medical assistance long term, and if you look at what it's doing to the total cost of care long term in the United States, it's adding trillions of dollars. Congress is having to come back over and over again right now to bail out states on Medicaid costs, making promises it can't keep with money it doesn't have. This is exactly what could happen with the private marketplace. Good quality private insurance coverage in the state of Minnesota if we allow the federal government to take it over. Because Minnesota has such a big lead in delivering high quality, cost effective health care coverage, because we have the lead, we dare not surrender it to a federalized approach. Now, there may be some states in this nation that are screaming, crying out for something, maybe something even as bad as Obamacare. But Minnesota isn't one of them. Minnesota isn't one of them. We've got the tools. We have the ability. With the addition of the personal health premium account, we can do even better, members. This is a great bill. Representative Wardlow, thank you for your question. I hope members will vote green.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
If Representative Gottwalt, do we yield for just one more question?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Gottwalt, if you could just confirm for the body that the language on line 3.29, which states that trust created and trustees appointed under the Act shall make funds available for the payment of premiums on any type of health insurance from any insurance company. If you could just confirm that that means that the Department of Commerce, the Commissioner of Commerce, or anyone else could put restrictions on what kind of health insurance plans the premium funds could be used for, that would be helpful.
The gentleman from Stearns, Chair Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Wardlow. I will confirm that. Thank you.
Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the conference report on House File number 8, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. No. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File 8 as amended by conference.
Third reading is amended by conference. Any further discussion? The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for recognizing me almost before I wanted to be recognized. Now that it's been adopted, members, I don't mean to sound smug about this, but to the folks on the other side of the aisle, we gave you a chance to do the right thing, send this thing back to committee so it could be worked out. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here that didn't get fully vetted in the conference committee with a half an hour's notice or an hour's notice. Representative Franzen, will you yield, please?
The lady from Douglas will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Franzen, for yielding. I assume you've got a copy of the... I ask you to yield because you raised the question. On line 3.12 through 3.14, and I'm sure every member's got this in their hands so that they can review this conference committee report that's very controversial. And I normally don't read, Mr. Speaker, but I will read this one line. It says, the administrator shall identify and notify the account holder and contributors of any applicable tax subsidies and tax credits for which the account holder or contributor qualifies in connection with the account or items paid for through the account. Does that sound like, to Representative Franzen, sure sounds like an endorsement of the Affordable Care Act to me. Those are the tax subsidies. What else could we be talking about? Those are literally, they're quoted tax subsidies and tax credits that would go into these accounts. Does that concern you, Representative Franzen?
The lady from Douglas, Representative Franzen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Representative Atkins, I wish we would have done a roll call vote on this because I voted against the bill. I have many concerns about this bill, and so we'll see where it goes from there.
The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Franzen. Will Representative Huntley yield?
Gentleman from St. Louis will yield. Gentleman from Dakota.
Representative Huntley, I have the same question that the tax subsidies and tax credits that are referenced in here. It's apparent to me that those are the same tax subsidies and tax credits that would be available under the Affordable Care Act. Is that your understanding as well?
The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker and members, it sure appears to me that the subsidies for people that get subsidized health care under the Affordable Care Act, the money would come from the feds, and so it's related to tax subsidies from the federal government, and this bill as written says that this group could use those dollars to do what they want to do.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Huntley. Representative Wardlow, would you yield, please?
The gentleman from Dakota will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
You know what, Mr. Speaker, Representative Wardlow, I don't need you to yield. You're the one who asked the question originally. Representative Huntley, will you yield yet again?
The gentleman from St. Louis will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Because, Mr. Speaker, Representative Wardlow, you hit it right on the head on line 3.29, and I think this would have been clarified in a reasonable conference committee as well. You've got make funds, one of the Commerce Commissioner's responsibilities, apparently, and I think you cited to it, or one of the plan's responsibilities is to make funds available for the payment of premiums on any type of health insurance included in Section 62B, that references this, from any insurance company. Representative Huntley, if in fact we don't, as a legislature, establish a health insurance exchange or the framework for one, and the Dayton administration does it because they have to in order to avoid having the feds do it for us, would that allow for payments to a health insurance exchange under Representative Gottwalt's bill and therefore endorse the Affordable Care Act?
The gentleman from St. Louis, Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker, it certainly looks like it to me. And again, folks ought to read their own bills and try to understand what's in them.
The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rest my case. Please vote no. If you don't like the Affordable Care Act, please vote no. Members on our side of the aisle who do like the Affordable Care Act, because the process stunk. It stunk to high heaven, Mr. Speaker, and if they had simply brought it through a committee like yours when you're down here with us, the Tax Committee, I'm sure you would have found these issues. If they had brought it in a reasonable fashion before the Conference Committee and had some testimony on it without 37 minutes notice or whatever it turned out to be, they would have known this beforehand. Members, vote no.
Discussion. The gentleman from Stearns, Representative Gottwalt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker and members, what you're hearing on the floor today is the same old story. You got the Democrats who want Obamacare. They want to cast aspersions on this and hope they can flake off a few of our members to vote against it, maybe throw a few doubts into things. They've made suggestions that somehow something that hasn't even been imposed yet, they've made hypothetical assumptions that somehow existing federal tax law is suddenly going to apply under some hypothetical circumstance under which something may or may not be applied, may or may not be adopted. I mean, this has been the whole problem with Obamacare right along, but what you've really got is them standing in the way of little things that can help private individuals purchase their own private market-based coverage. Consumer empowerment scares the heck out of the Democrats who want to see Obamacare. Because what they want is for the federal government to come in and tell us how to do everything. To supersede what's already good about state law, to supersede what's already good about federal trust law, to supersede all of the tools already available to us and tell us what's best for us, tell us how it should be done, force us to do this, force us to do that. Representative Franzen and Representative Wardlow, I respect your concerns, absolutely. But that's exactly why we're bringing these kinds of ideas forward, because they work with what's already here, the rules already in place, without an Obamacare exchange, without new Obamacare rules and regulations, forcing people to do things they don't want to do, making promises we can't keep with money we don't have. No, they work with what's already there. The Center for the American Experiment. You know, this isn't an ALEC bill. So people were all concerned about an ALEC bill. Center for the American Experiment helped us put it together. One of the organizations in the state of Minnesota that is dedicated to private market-based solutions that empower consumers, and which stands diametrically opposed to Obamacare and its imposition of federal command and control. So I hope that answers the question, members. There's a clear difference here. The people who want Obamacare and want to kill any idea that might be perpendicular to it, and those of us who want to keep moving forward with great Minnesota ideas, using tools already at our disposal to empower consumers to do what they want, what they do best. Vote green.
John from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, thank you, Representative Gottwalt, for bringing this forward. You have addressed all of my concerns, and Representative Atkins had some good questions there. But if you look at line 3.29, where it states, members, that funds from these premium accounts must be available for the payment of premiums on any type of health insurance from any health insurance company, that means that one of the primary concerns I have with the Affordable Care Act is not here. That means that neither the Commissioner of Commerce nor anyone else except for this legislature and the governor working together could limit the kinds of health insurance that would be allowable under this bill. So this bill clearly states that any kind of health insurance from any company may be purchased by funds placed into these unified premium accounts. So this is a pro-free market bill, members. This has nothing to do with the Affordable Care Act. It's not an exchange, and in fact, it acts contrary to the idea of an exchange. Members, in a state-operated exchange or a federally imposed exchange, essentially the same thing, because they're both regulated by the Commissioner of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. And the Commissioner of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C., if we set up a state-operated exchange, could tell us what kind of health care and what kind of health insurance Minnesotans could purchase through the exchange, and could limit what we could do with our health care dollars. This does exactly the opposite. This allows multiple sources of multiple contributions for premiums to come together into one place, and then those those funds can be used to buy insurance and care of any type the consumer desires, pursuant to 3.29, 3.3, and 3.31 there. So this is not an exchange. This is a good free market reform, and I urge a green vote.
Further discussion? Being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. Gautier votes no, there being 69 ayes and 60 nays. The bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to. We will now, members, go to the calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1679. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1679 on the calendar for the day, the first engrossment, an act relating to human services.
I recognize the author, the gentleman from Chisago, Representative Barrett, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Senate File 1679 extends 4 advisory councils that are scheduled to expire on June 30th of this year. It also recognizes the authority of the Sunset Commission to review the continuance of these councils when the Department of Human Services is scheduled for review in 2014. All 4 of these are extended 2 years to June 30th, 2014. These councils include the American Indian Advisory Council, the Citizens Advisory Council that advises the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Division on problems with alcohol and drug abuse, the Traumatic Brain Injury Advisory Council, and the American Indian Child Welfare Advisory Council. And I would stand for any questions.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill's third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1679.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 0 nays, Senate File 1679 is passed and its title agreed to. Fiscal calendar pursuant to Rule 1.22, Holberg for the Committee on Ways and Means calls up for immediate consideration. Senate File 1653, the clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1653 on the fiscal calendar for the day, unofficially engrossed and reprinted for the House to include committee amendments. An act relating to labor and industry.
The gentleman from Anoka, Representative Sanders, to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, this bill deals with the misclassification of independent contractors in the construction industry. This is a widely acknowledged problem in the construction industry in the state of Minnesota. The Office of Legislative Auditor discovered this issue and wrote about it in 2007. Since that time, we've been trying to find an appropriate fix. There was a program that is currently in existence that was installed to try and fix what the OLA wrote about in 2007. This is called the ICEC, or the Independent Contractor Exemption Certificate Program. This program is widely acknowledged as being unsuccessful, not completely fixing the problem. In fact, throughout the implementation of this program, we've actually found that the problem with worker misclassification is actually getting worse. There was a task force that met in 2008. They've been working since that time again to find solutions. We believe and have worked through the committee process that this is a very good approach to fixing the worker misclassification problem for independent contractors in the state of Minnesota. This bill ends the ICEC program and inserts a registration pilot project. It is free to register in this project. You are registering with the Department of Labor and Industry. This is really about consumer protection. We want to make sure that folks are paying workers' comp, paying unemployment insurance if they apply, making sure that they're paying their taxes, employee and employer, and we want to make sure that that is all happening above board. If you are a properly registered company or independent contractor, this bill actually does nothing. This bill is encouraging registration, but if you are registered, you just need to continue operating above board as you are now. This bill is supported by a majority of the contractor industry, the construction industry. It is supported by the Builders Association of Minnesota and the Department of Labor and Industry. Thank you.
There are amendments at the desk. The clerk will announce the amendment.
Wester moving to amend Senate File 1653, the first on official engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A3.
The member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Madam Speaker, just checking to make sure which one it is. Madam Speaker, members, this amendment would exempt handymen, as we discussed in Ways and Means Committee, and some of you have heard it probably elsewhere. The Department of Labor, when we had it in front of Ways and Means, said that the intent was not to affect any handymen, folks that just do odd jobs, do part-time work, and so, but the bill did not cross-reference that. I've worked with House research staff, ran it by the Department of Labor and the author of the bill, and this would cross-reference and to help clarify that folks that engage in handyman work, fixing siding, painting a little bit here and there, aren't the ones that we're going after, not the ones we're intending to trip up with the filing requirement that's under this bill. And so, members, I would urge your support for the ladies and gentlemen in your district that do this part-time and do this kind of work from time to time.
Discussion. The member from Anoka, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I would accept this as a friendly amendment. I did speak with the Builders Association, the trades, as well as the Department of Labor and Industry. Everyone is okay with this amendment. I also have a letter from the Commissioner of Dolly stating that it is not the intent of this bill and that we maintained the handyman exemption in this bill. However, it's correct, it was not expressly written, and that's all that this amendment does, and I would urge members' support.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy.
Well, Madam Speaker, Representative Sanders, Representative Westrom, as I read it, it is not gender specific. I hope I am correct.
Are you asking for him to yield? Okay. Is there any further discussion? The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as Representative Sanders said, the author of the bill said, yes, this basically is confirming there's already the handyman or handywoman exemption, gender nonspecific in law, and it just puts it in this bill. It just states it explicitly, but it's already covered. So it's okay to put on.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A3 amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The amendment prevails. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Westrom moving to amend Senate File 1653, the unofficial engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A5.
The member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Madam Speaker, members, thank you for your support of the last amendment. This amendment just adds a little clarity for due process in the bill. It gives any party that doesn't know or hasn't filed, that is supposed to file for the independent contractor exemption license or application. If they haven't done that, the bill says they're forgiven for a penalty if they do it within 30 days. This just says that the commissioner should include that notice on the notice that would go out to the party that hasn't filed. I think it helps probably speed up the compliance. Otherwise, while it's in statute, the only way many small business owners would get to know this would have to be by hiring an attorney, and by the time they get to the attorney's office and get this figured out, the 30 days maybe has passed. So I don't think this is. I think this is good government, good notice to the parties of what would already be in law. So I'd urge your support.
Discussion. The member from Anoka, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, similarly, I see this as a friendly amendment. It's always been my intention that if individuals were not registered and were contacted by the Department of Labor and were instructed or needed to register under the qualifications, that they would be given notice that they had 30 days to do so. So I view this as just an explanation and ask for support.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A5 amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The amendment prevails. There are no more amendments on the desk. We will go to third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1653, as amended.
Third reading. Any further discussion? The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise to support Senate File 1653. I was an author of the original law that this is amending that was passed in 2007. At the time, we were attempting to address widespread problems in the construction industry, the misclassification of employees as independent contractors. A legislative auditor report that year stated that 20% of the unemployment insurance audits done in the construction industry found that workers were misclassified. The intent of this law was to ensure that workers were properly classified as employees, unless they were legitimate independent contractors. Unfortunately, there was a loophole in the law that was misinterpreted by the courts as a safe haven. Courts have held that if a worker is an owner of an LLC or corporation, they are automatically exempt from any scrutiny as to whether or not this law they are a legitimate business. Two court cases, in my opinion, wrongly held that workers who own LLCs cannot be employees, even if they look like employees, act like employees, and are treated like employees in every other way. The cases are Nelson versus Levy, 796 Northwest 2nd, 336, and Rowan versus Dream It Incorporated, number A11-1135, both in the Minnesota Court of Appeals. In the Rowan case, the court held that a painter was not an employee, even though he was forced to submit his resignation, file for an LLC, and then continue to work only for that employee in a substantially identical role. These and many others have created loopholes that allow some contractors to avoid paying workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, Social Security, and withholding taxes from their employees because the courts refuse to analyze whether they are individually and actually performing construction work and acted as employees simply because the individual owned an LLC. This bill closes that loophole by clarifying that if they work in the construction industry, you're either working as an employee or you're an independent business owner. And if you have a business, you have to behave like a true independent business. If you don't operate as an independent business, you are somebody else's employees. Again, I support the 1653 and please vote green.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 118 ayes and 11 nays, the bill passes and its title agreed to. The member from Carver.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker and members, I move a recess to the call of the chair for approximately a half an hour to give our friends in the Senate time to send us a couple of more things to work on.
Member moves to recess. All those in favor of recess, please say aye. Aye. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I forgot. Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will Representative Hoppe yield for a question?
He'll yield. Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hoppe, do you know what items we're waiting for the Senate to send us and how long you anticipate will be out?
The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hillstrom, I don't know which items. I believe there are two things that we're waiting for them from. We're waiting for two things for the Senate to send us, and when we're approximately a half an hour, and the GOP members, we will caucus in 217 as soon as we recess. If I find out what they are, I'll come and tell you, Representative Hillstrom. I'm not sure which two items we're waiting for.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We will be caucusing immediately during the recess.
All those in favor of the recess, please say aye. Those opposed? No. We are in recess.